We're combining all the best old school wisdom with all the top new school methods to bring you the optimal way to coach and play the great game of baseball. This is the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass with Coach Bo.
Welcome, all of you great listeners. Welcome to our weekly get-together. I'm fired up for this one. Part one of an interview with Coach Ryan Foe. Ryan breaks down, along with me, we break down the mental game. We discuss in depth the mental game and how to coach youth players and their confidence, being present, dealing with failure, among a multitude of other things. The interview breaks down into 3 30-minute parts, and the goal is for you at the end of listening to this interview with Coach Ryan Foe that you all, the listeners, have a better, more clear understanding of what players are thinking, what's going on in their mind, what are some of the mental game issues, along with tangible, usable, actionable items that you can go out there, tools that you can take out there to the field and use with your players. First off, we need to create the paradigm. We need to shape and clarify the paradigm of the mental game in youth baseball and youth athletics, and that's what we get into. So, as you'll see, we're going to talk about building players' confidence, dealing with failure, and other tips and other strategies that we can use to better serve our players so they can maximize their potential. And it starts upstairs between the ears. We're going to dive right into it. After the interview, or after part one of the interview, I'll come back on, I'll finalize the episode, and we'll go from there. Oh, and before I do, I did go out to the Alabama-Georgia game, and Nick Saban, I've been on record many a time saying I think he's the best coach alive. And for those of you that watched the game or saw the score, he didn't win. But I'll tell you what, it's really hard to win when he didn't have his 2 best players on offense outside of his quarterback, Bryce Young. He lost his star receiver in the first quarter. I was right there in the second row. And he lost his top receiver, Mechie, in the SEC championship game. Now, I'm not making excuses for injuries. Of course not. I think that's something as a coach I never want to hear. I always say, you know how you know an immature coach? You know how you know a coach who doesn't have much experience? That's a coach who talks about injuries with his players when he's talking with other coaches, or in a little circle off to the side when they're having a little dialogue and he's bringing up, or that coach is bringing up the injuries and they're pointing out this and that and what they don't have. Experienced coaches that really understand what they're doing and clearly understand how coaching works, and that the ebbs and flows of injuries and the ups and downs and the lucky breaks and the not so lucky things that go against us, those all even out over the course of a season, over the course of a coaching career, and it happens to everybody, it happens to every team. Nick Saban didn't make an excuse about any of that. He didn't bring that up. He could have very easily said, hey, I had 2 All-American wide receivers out, so my quarterback had really nobody to work with. Now, with that said, I sat there in the second row, had great seats, went with my best friend. I actually was wearing a Georgia hat, and I had a Georgia little dog chain necklace thing that I got at the shop around the corner walking over to the stadium. And the reason I picked Georgia was, one, I thought Georgia was the better team. I thought Nick Saban was the better coach, but I think Georgia had the better talent. Also, my friend Barrett, he was big on Georgia, so we usually just pick a team. We go together on a team. I actually went with Georgia before the game. I got video, I got photo evidence of that. So as much as I think Nick Saban is the greatest coach alive, doesn't mean you're going to win all the games if you're the greatest coach. You're going to lose. You're going to lose more championships than you win. It just happens that way. That's just how coaching works. So don't stake your ego to your win-loss record, okay? There's things out of your control. I'll tell you what, Nick Saban, he coached a heck of a game. I'm surprised it was even that close. But I wanted to share with you that even though I have the utmost respect for Coach Saban, I didn't think this game lined up really well for him. And then after they lost their star receiver in the first quarter, I thought, wow, it's pretty much gone. But they battled, and they very well could have won that game. That's how good a coach Nick Saban is. Even losing 2 of his biggest stars, 2 All-American wide receiver, game-breaking All-American wide receivers, he was still in it at the end against Georgia, and Georgia was stacked. Let me tell you about that defense. Oh my, watching them up close from the second row, ooh-wee. man, it was a bunch of NFL players out there. And on offense, Georgia, man, they had some players. They had a big front line. They could run the ball. They were pounding it up front. But even then, Bama held their own. And here at the end of the day, Nick Saban really produced Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart is a carbon copy in a lot of ways of Nick Saban. Obviously, he was a protege of Nick Saban, and he left Alabama to take the Georgia job. So I just like to tie that all together, and what we can learn from that is that, hey, even though you may be the greatest coach of your generation, and I'm not saying any of us are, but Nick Saban clearly is, it doesn't matter all the time. Sometimes you're going to lose, and you're going to lose your fair share of games, and that's okay. What matters is you win with the players. You win as a coach when it comes to holding yourself to high character, setting a good example for your players, even when there's failure and it doesn't always work out your way. You don't make excuses. And it also, I think, starts by coaching up that mental game so we can deal with a lot of these things, some failure and some things like that. And I'll tell you what, Nick Saban's mental game is elite. Talk about a mental game. He has elite mental game. Now you might be saying, Coach Bo, he's a coach. What do you mean mental game? I thought mental game was for the player. I'll tell you what, the mental game is something as useful for coaches as it is for players. And players feed off coaches with good mental game strategies too. So when you listen to this episode with Coach Ryan Foe, it's a good one. This is really good. This exceeded my expectations, and you're going to hear part 1 today. I'll roll out part 2 next week and part 3 the following week. You're going to see some things, you're going to hear things that you can use right away, not just with your players, but with yourself and your own mindset to be a better coach, to have better teams, to win more games, to have more fun, and to build and nurture better human beings that you are leading. All right, with that said, let's dive into it. Oh, real quick, I want to apologize. The audio on my end, for some reason, didn't turn out all that great. I had Sam, my editor, work as best he could with it. Something happened, but the good news is Ryan's audio came in phenomenal. It was recorded as good as any audio I've been able to record on any of my interviews, so I'm fired up. His audio is crystal clear. Mine is a little out of the norm, but nevertheless, you can hear it fine, and we'll go from there. I just wanted to throw that out there if it sounds a little awkward on the audio. Okay, now for part 1 of the interview, improving the mental game with ourselves and our athletes. I'm here with Ryan Foe. I'm excited to have Ryan with us here on the 80/20 Baseball podcast, the 80/20 Baseball Masterclass. We're getting into a topic today that I'm super passionate about, and I know Ryan's super passionate about, but hopefully by the end of this interview, we can lift up your passion as coaches and youth coaches towards this topic of the mental game and mental health with athletes. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for coming on here and helping to serve the youth baseball community.
Yeah, of course. That's what it's all about.
Awesome. It's great to have. I've had some other interviews with some older than me, some guys in their 50s, and now or I guess late 40s and some in their 50s. It's nice to have a younger person on, a different perspective. And I know we've gone back and forth. We've been emailing, and I know you have a background in this, so I'm excited to get this out to the listeners.
Yeah, everyone's always surprised when they hop on a Zoom call with me if they're guests on my podcast. They think like sports psychology is going to be some doctor hopping on. They see me, I'm like 22. And they're like, oh, okay. And they relax a little bit. And they're like, okay, now we can talk.
I think that different perspective for the bulk of our listeners on this podcast are dads that are coaching youth baseball and high school coaches and some college and pro coaches. And they're typically between that 35 and 50-year-old mark. But having some young, fresh, out-of-the-box thinking in certain ways can be really beneficial for the listener. So I'm glad to have you on. Speaking of, you mentioned something about your podcast, and just maybe you could give the listeners a quick background story on you and, where you're at now and what you're doing with the mental game.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a ball player at heart. That's always been my thing growing up. When I was growing up, is eat, breathe, sleep baseball. I had this strong, really strong association to baseball. It was everything about me. And I was pretty talented growing up, and in high school, or going into high school, I was thought of as someone who had potential. I had strong work ethic, always worked out, always hit the cages. And, baseball was just a huge part of my life. And going into high school, I actually moved from Northern California to Southern California. So there's a little bit of a culture shock there. I was getting used to, how it is down here, the different style of baseball that's played in Southern California as opposed to, other parts of the country. And that's when I started to kind of go on a downward slide in terms of my performance. And I associate that a lot to, how I managed anxiety and my confidence level throughout high school. But I was really unaware of these things. Not a lot of ball players, we talk about all the time how, baseball is 80%, 90% mental. You hear it all the time. It's perpetuated through coaches, players. Baseball is all mental. The thing is, we never really devote any time or resources, especially at amateur levels, to improving our mental game. And I had a decent high school career. I played junior varsity my freshman and sophomore year. I struggled a little bit. My junior year, I played well. I played well enough to get noticed, and I got recruited to a D2 school in Oakland. I really had an underwhelming collegiate ball playing experience, and it was littered with, bouts of anxiety. I suffered from a lot of depression. I was getting really burnt out from the sport. And it was unfortunate because I saw the sport that I love become something like a chore, and it happens with a lot of athletes, and a lot of athletes don't talk about it much, especially with each other or their coaches. And then I graduated. My career ended a little bit abruptly because of COVID. I decided not to return for my fourth year because I had already finished all my credits and whatnot. So I decided, this is it for me. I'm going to hang them up. And it was really an abrupt experience. And I never really got that full closure from competing every single day and practicing and working out and the whole nine. And I never really got that closure from it. So fast forward a couple months post-graduation, I figure out what I'm trying to do with my life, what every college grad goes through. And me and my two close friends were sitting in his room one day, and he's really big on, entrepreneurship, starting his own business. He wanted to get the ball rolling on that because he didn't want 95. And I could relate in a way. And we were just sitting there figuring out what we want to do. And I started reflecting a little bit on my ball playing career. And I started thinking about why I didn't play up to my full potential, because I thought I was a lot better of an athlete than it turns out that I was. And I wanted to know why that was. And I started remembering feelings of anxiety, of depression, getting burnt out in college. And I started really getting into the fundamentals of sports psychology. I started learning about a lot about mindfulness, about meditation, about visualization, how to induce presence. And all these skills are closely associated with performance in sports. So I kind of had this epiphany. I'm like, I'm just learning about all this stuff now. What if I'd learned about it, 5 years ago when I was in high school, or 3 years ago when I was still in college? And I started to realize the impact that mental performance could have on a young athlete's performance, especially in developmental stages in a young athlete's life or when they're really impressionable. And I started to realize the impact that it could have. It could transform careers. And I just started getting super passionate about it. And I started getting kind of angry because I never had those sort of resources available to me when I was playing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I started to realize there's certain things that mental performance and mental health and well-being is hidden behind. It's hidden behind stigma in sports culture, that rah-rah mentality of baseball, especially. I started realizing how it's hidden behind paywalls, how you have to pay $150, $200 to talk to a sports psychologist. And oftentimes they can't really relate to you on a personal level because they're like an old head and they tell you all these things that you don't really understand. So yeah, I just realized that, proper mental resources for athletes are hidden behind paywalls, stigma, lack of awareness. And I wanted to change that. So I started learning more about the fundamentals of sports psychology, the impact that mindfulness techniques can have on not only in-game performance, but an athlete's well-being and skills in life as a whole in terms of increasing confidence, reducing stress, anxiety, and pressure. And that really got me going. It really got me excited. So yeah, I started Psych Athletes, and the overall mission is to just spread awareness of mental health and performance resources to underserved athletes everywhere.
You have your own podcast. The podcast can be found on every platform.
Yes, every single platform. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor. It's the number one, believe it or not, but a guy with an international relations degree, no experience in sports psychology, just a former athlete talking about the fundamentals of sports psychology, got to number one on sports psychology podcasts on Apple Podcasts.
That's awesome. And it doesn't surprise me at all, Ryan, because my experience in the game has shown that the athletes that have a success, that say make it to the major leagues or have a lot of success in college and don't really suffer from setbacks in their game, their career goes smooth. They might have slumps, but it's an upward trajectory. They all the way to the major leagues. They don't really need to fall back on the mental game, or maybe they already inherently had it instilled in them and they didn't know it. Maybe their parents had coaches coaches instill it, or maybe they were just so good they didn't need it, because some players are just so good that they don't quite need it until it's time to hang them up later on.
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
I played with a guy, Jared Weaver, who was the college player of the year, and then he won 150 games in the major leagues. I don't think he was one who needed it. He was uber talented. He never did not have success. From the time he was probably 17 to the time he retired, whatever age, I think it was like 34 or whatever he retired at, he never really didn't have success. I know he had a couple rougher years towards the end, but he knew that was physical. It wasn't a mental thing. He never lacked for the mental game. But for the other 99.9999% of people, we need that mental game toolbox. And so I'm glad you're on here. That fires me up to hear that you're up there. Number one, you're onto something big here. And, I'm really fired up to dig into this for the listeners. So you played college, you had a successful, career up through there in the youth baseball. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'd like to get into is kind of unpack this mental game. So we got these listeners, a lot of the listeners might not even have much of a background with the mental game. And, they may, but they may not have been, they haven't been exposed to some of these deeper conversations with the mental game and the impact it can have on athletes, and it can paralyze athletes like Rick Ankiel. That was in the early 2000s. I just remember him coming up, and even after he got drafted, I go, wow, this guy's awesome. This guy. And all of a sudden, one outing in the playoffs, he was pitching, and he threw it off the backstop, and he got the yips, what they call the yips, and we can talk about that. And next thing you know, he never pitched again. This was a can't-miss player in the major leagues. It was going to be a pitcher, a left-handed pitcher who threw hard, really athletic, good player. And all of a sudden, he was out of the game as a pitcher. And the cool story about that, obviously, is he came back as an outfielder. But it can happen to somebody like him. It can happen to everybody. So let's get into the first question here. Ryan, you ready for it?
Of course.
All right. So why is the mental game, I'm just going to come right out of the gate here, right out of the gate swinging. Why is the mental game important to players, youth players? And what's the main couple reasons it's vital for players? And why should youth coaches care about it?
Of course. Yeah, that's the number one question. Like you said, athletes at a certain point in time get derailed a little bit, and they don't have the specific resources to improve their mental game in order to get back on the right track. And athletes at the highest levels of any sport, especially baseball, they have access to these mental health and performance resources. Even at the collegiate level, you have programs and personnel devoted to mental skills training and mental performance because it's such an integral part of the game of baseball. Everyone says 80-90% of the game is mental. The athletes at the highest levels of the game of sports in the world, because they have those resources, why shouldn't we as amateur, level athletes and coaches devote time and resources, especially in such a developmental and impressionable period in a young athlete's career? Because athletes at such a young age, they're so impressionable. They can be impacted by an innumerable amount of things, by making a mistake, by a coach yelling at them, by, parents at family situations, the whole nine. So practicing the mental game can absolutely transform a player's belief about themselves, their confidence level, their ability to manage nerves and anxiety, and thus elevating our level of play. So it's absolutely worth investing time and energy into improving an athlete's mental game and the way that they perceive the game of baseball.
100%. The giving and sharing the resources. I love your mindset. You're trying to take these resources that are readily available for college and professional players, and you're trying to provide and serve the youth and I'm guessing from the high school level down, basically the amateur level, the youth game.
When we started Psych Athletes, I was more focused because I was just thinking about the players who were like me. That's kind of my shtick. What I do is I simplify advanced level sports psychology fundamentals, and I try and make them as easily digestible as I can for athletes that are unaware. And what I learned is my messaging was more geared towards the youth sports realm and amateur athletes at the high school, collegiate level even. And what I learned is that there are athletes, not just in baseball and all across the world. I've learned that I've talked to athletes that are like 40, 50, 30, cyclists, grapplers, rugby players, such obscure sports that I didn't even think about. And they're just coming to me and they're like, this stuff is great. Like, this is helping me on not just a physical level, but an emotional and mental level as well.
Absolutely. I think the thing that really stands out the most when it comes to the difference between the professional and the high level collegiate level and youth sports, youth athletes, amateur athletes is it's not that it's any different what works and what is important and the benefits and the strategies. And in a lot of cases, it's not different. There's no difference at all. And what I found is the youth game, there's less time. They're not out there day in and day out. It's not a full-time job. So with that said, with a couple kind of key, just thinking key ideas for youth coaches as we move through this, because I know youth coaches might just have 2 practices a week, maybe 1 practice, maybe at the most 3 practices. That's typical, a couple practices a week, where, as you know, college and pro is almost a day in, day out, year-round type of activity, type of sport, and almost it's a job. What are maybe some of the key reasons that you've seen the mental game impacts game performance for youth players? So what are a few things that you see? Where does it impact? So as I'm a coach, a youth coach, I'm like, hey, why do I need to know this? Why is it important? Maybe you could highlight a few areas that are common in youth sports, and not just baseball, but maybe just in general. What are some things that you see impacted by the mental game not being where maybe it could be and not having a strong mental game?
Well, the first touch on what you said about, the lack of resources and the time and the energy, and coaches are really overwhelmed with the, workload that they have to do. So it's understandable, that we can't devote as much time and energy towards, mental performance as we'd like, but there are ways that we can, simple ways, and just things that you wouldn't even think of, just like confidence building exercises, breathing exercises, even meditation at a very basic level can have profound impact on an athlete's performance. But to answer your question, the main number one thing that I see with young athletes and athletes in general regarding mental performance is confidence. 100%. That's the main thing that all athletes struggle with, or at some point in their careers. And that's the number one thing that athletes come to talk to me about. Then there's, ability to manage nerves and anxiety, performance anxiety. That's another huge one. The ability to stay present in the moment. And these things are especially prevalent in baseball, right? Because when we're talking about presence, we can't hit, field, and throw and think at the same time. When we're talking about confidence is a necessary tool that we must have in order to perform at our peak potential. And nerves and anxiety in pressure situations in baseball, like 9th inning, 6th inning, whatever it might be for youth baseball, 7th inning, when we get to those pressure situations and we get those nerves and our heart starts beating fast and our mind starts racing, it is important to know how to manage these things and kind of influence them on a mental level in order to impact our performance. So presence, confidence, nerves, and anxiety, those are probably the biggest things that I see that are lacking from a lot of youth athletes.
The mind, what I'm hearing from you, and this is such a key concept that I want all the listeners to really, truly grasp, and you got to believe us on this, the mind can hinder and absolutely paralyze physical performance.
100%.
The mind, the thoughts, more specifically, the thoughts, the excess thoughts, the thoughts that are not on the task at hand, which is most of our thoughts are not on that task at hand, the presence, being present. So you hit the nail. What I truly believe is being a big fan. Before we went live here, Ryan, I was sharing with you, I'm a huge fan of this, like a massively huge fan of this, and being present. I've seen it, and I've even made the number one book recommendation I've made on this podcast, and I've made about half a dozen, maybe up to 10 book recommendations on this podcast, is The Power of Now. And that's not even a baseball book. It has nothing to do with baseball. They don't talk, but it has everything to do with baseball. And it's really the whole idea is mindfulness, focus, presence. And it's just amazing that the mental game can paralyze and almost negate the physical talent or skills of a player. Yeah. It's just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The mental game can either hinder you or elevate your game. It's like the feeding the two wolves that I'm sure I've heard over my years of playing baseball from my coaches, the two wolves. You can either feed the good one or the evil one. The mental game is the same exact thing. We can either build skills or learn skills that elevate our mental game, or we can feed negative thoughts and we can overthink and we can develop, negative self-belief patterns, destructive thought patterns. We can develop nerves and anxiety, low confidence, and all that can be attributed to not training the mental side of the game.
Absolutely. And it's hard to see. So youth coaches are listening to this. And as we try to, at the beginning of this, Ryan and I were discussing, how do we convey the importance of this? Because we believe we've been in the trenches. We've been in baseball long enough to know the importance of this and in life. But how do we convey that importance to the listener, all you listeners, the youth coaches? It's hard to see it in action. It's hard to tie the two together, connect the dots. When we see a ball go between a player's legs, or they miss and strike out and they swing and miss, or they make a bad pitch, we see the physical because it's easily visual, it's visible with the eyes. But what's going on upstairs that may have caused it, unless we have some kind of Neuralink type of deal, maybe down the road, Elon Musk will be able to get us something we can see on our iPad in the dugout. But until that day, it's hard to see that. But you got to trust us. I'm telling this to the listeners. You got to trust Ryan and I that this has a major impact on game performance. Ryan, you said the number one thing it impacts is confidence. And if players don't have confidence, confidence. Yeah. Watch out.
The big thing, I see what you're saying when we're talking about how can we recognize it, or how can we know that this is an important thing related to performance. And I kind of think about it like this. When we see like a hitter swing and miss, or we see a pitcher throw a wild pitch, or a ball go through a fielder's legs, or they miss a fly ball, it's a lot easier to go, okay, we need to fix something with your mechanics.
Yep.
It is 100%. And I'm not saying it's a cop-out. A lot of times there are mechanical solutions to a player's play, 50-50 of the time. It's like that. And it's a lot easier to just say, okay, well, we need to fix this with your swing. We need to fix this with your fielding stance, or you need to get lower on your ground balls. But my line of thinking is, if you've seen one of your players field 1,000 ground balls, or hit BP 1,000,000 times and rarely swing and miss, or field 1,000 fly balls, or throw a ton of strikes, and they mess up like that in the game, they've done it 1,000,000 times before. So there's something wrong upstairs. There's some confidence missing, or there's some fear of failure there, or there's some nerves and anxiety there that's hard to recognize, that is most likely contributing to a failure to accomplish a simple task in baseball. It's just like the yips. You've seen your players play catch 1,000,000 times. That's the most fundamental part of playing baseball. But all of a sudden they get into a game and they can't make a throw from second base to first base. And your instinct is to go, okay, well, you're kind of pressing, you're holding on to the ball too long, or your release point's not right. It's easy to say that, but if they've done it 1,000,000 times, then there's something going on there that isn't fixed with physical solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The yips. So the yips, YIPS, yips. This is a common term used in the baseball community for a lot of years. Can you share out, I'm kind of going off script here.
No problem.
From some of our pre-scripted questions we discussed, but maybe you could just give a description or a definition of what the yips is to you and to the listener. And so they can, there are going to be listeners that are definitely going to go, well, I might have heard yips, but I'm not familiar. And there might be some listeners that have never heard that term.
Yeah, we don't like to say the Y word, ball players. We don't like to make it known. That's a big thing. And
it's taboo for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Just like mental performance, because it's such a kind of, what's the word for it? Not a metaphor. The yips are so indicative of our neglection of the mental game of baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Because the yips can be defined as something that you've done 1,000,000 times, and all of a sudden it seems impossible to do. Making a throw from second base to first base, making a throw from the catcher to the pitcher. We've done it 1,000,000 times, but there's something psychologically hindering us from doing this essential task, right?
Yep, absolutely. So when I think of the yips, and I actually experienced a little of this throughout my career, it was boiled down to one thing. And the result was exactly what you were talking about. It was, I'd done something 1,000,000 times, 10,000 times, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, I felt like I lost that a physical capability to do a skill or to complete an action. But it was upstairs that was paralyzing through the thoughts. It was negative thoughts. It was anxiety, kind of all together. It was excess thinking. It was thinking,
100%.
Don't walk this kid, or don't walk him. Whatever you do, don't walk him. And of course,
you walk him.
Yeah. And then the next guy.
So the thing with the yips, I've had so many athletes come to talk to me about the yips, and I experienced the yips in high school and college. Like, there were bouts in my career where I just could not make a throw, or I was overthrowing people. And if you've ever had the yips, there's this certain like feeling that you get, that rising sensation in your chest when you know you're supposed to be doing a simple task and you're scared, you're really fearful of messing it up. That contributes a lot to the yips. It's not being in the present moment. It's overthinking your release point. It's overthinking your load and not really engaging and absorbing the present moment. So I've kind of developed this little kind of formula for fixing the yips, and it's kind of really based on my experience with a little bit of sports psychology mixed in. But I always felt like when I was making good throws and I was doing the things that I needed to be, I was really involved in the game. I was really enveloped in the moment. I felt like I was sweaty. I was like game ready. You kind of know what I'm saying?
Yep.
You're like really in the moment and you're not thinking about anything else. You're not thinking about your release point, and you're competing essentially. So there's two things that you want to do to fix the yips if you see an athlete that has them. Is first, make them play catch and throw 1,000 balls back and forth. Build that confidence. Let them know that they can do this simple task, even though it seems impossible sometimes. Build that confidence in them. Okay. Okay. And then give them some positive support and be like, all right, let's make this throw, or make it seem like not so much of a big deal. Really get them involved in the present moment. Make them work a lot if you see that they're struggling to make a simple throw. Because when we're competing and we're really engaged in the present moment, we complete tasks kind of on autopilot. It's natural. It's instinct to us. You kind of see what I'm saying? So those are the two big things. Build the confidence in them, get them back on the right track, let them know that they can do this simple task, okay? And then get them really involved in the game, really engaged in the present moment, make them sweat, make them work. That's kind of my solution. And I've talked to a lot of athletes about it, and they said that helped them a lot.
I like it.
It's kind of my like makeshift little, because there's no fix to the yips, right? It's hard.
Yeah, well, you're getting them back on the horse. What I'm hearing is you're saying you're struggling with whatever it is. Maybe you can't. Maybe a pitcher is not being able to throw strikes or hit the glove and command, or an infielder. You see this Chuck Knobloch, Steve Sachs, throwing back some old school from the 80s and 90s guys that were second basemen that got the yips and would throw it over the head. But Bull Durham, he had though. It was the overthinking out there on the mound. There's a great movie, by the way, listeners, For the Love of the Game, and Kevin Costner in The Love of the Game, he says clear the mechanism. What he's saying is stop thinking.
Yep.
And just flow. And so that's a great movie. First off, it's a great movie, but when he says clear the mechanism in that movie, Kevin Costner is on the mound. What he's saying is stop thinking and just be present, go with the flow and pitch. And you know, one thing I think that's interesting, Ryan, you were hitting on it, the consequences of this. We were connecting dots. There's kind of a middleman here. And the middleman is you have the thoughts, the anxiety, the negative thoughts. So an infielder, a hitter, they have these negative thoughts as they're getting in the box, or right before the pitch, or right as the ground ball is coming to them, or as they're about to throw. They have these negative thoughts, these anxious thoughts, just a lot going through their head that's not healthy, not productive. And then what it does is it the middle person, then the result ends up being subpar. The result is not good. It's an errant throw, a bad swing, just being super aggressive at the plate, swinging before the pitcher even really before you even really see the pitch coming. You're already committed. You're just so anxious. There's a middle thing there, and that is the muscles tighten up. And the muscle. So it's a mental thing that then paralyzes the muscles, and the muscles get tight, and then the body's not loose and relaxed, and then it's tight, and tight, restricted muscles in athletes is not good at all. Would you agree with that observation?
Yeah, 100%. We're talking about presence, and we're talking about breathing, and we're talking about, muscles tighten up. It's all connected in terms of mental performance. When I mentioned earlier about getting them into the present moment with the yips, it's all about getting out of your head and into your body. And when we're competing and we're not thinking, our muscles are loose, we're relaxed, we're ready to go, we're in the moment, and we're kind of in the flow state. So there's a bunch of fixes for one solution. You could approach the yips in any single way. You can try and engage them in the present moment. You could try breathing techniques. You could try meditation. You could try positive affirmations. You could try building confidence. There's a lot of fixes and solutions when we're talking about mental performance for a single issue. And it's important for us to kind of understand what we're saying and teaching kids how to do the things that we're telling them to do, like these short phrases like relax, like stop thinking, stop overthinking, get in the moment, be present. Because you hear those terms, shouted out a lot on the practice field, on the baseball field. When I was up at bat, my coach could tell me or he could tell that I wasn't confident, or I had gone 0 for 4 in my last 4 at bats, and he'd shout something like, be confident up there. And I'd be like, okay, well, how do I do that? How am I supposed to muster up this confidence if I don't know where to draw it from? You kind of see what I'm saying? How do I stop thinking and be in the moment if I don't know how to do them? So that's the number one thing that I wanted to come on here and talk about when I'm talking to coaches. It's just those little affirmations that we shout out. Instead of trying to kind of force our players to be confident, or force our players to flush mistakes, or force them to relax and loosen their body, we need to teach them how to do these things. And it's not very hard to do so. So a lot of coaches to do is I want you to kind of eliminate the short phrases like have some confidence or relax or flush it, and instead teach them how to do these things through a quick set of breathing, or an adjustment in body language, or engaging in the present moment by, feeling their senses in their body. There's a multitude of ways that you can do a certain task, but it's all about knowing how to teach them how to do it, essentially.
Wow. You know what? You just made me think of something that I never saw And that is these short phrases, the short phrases, especially when they're a mental cue, a mental game cue, these short one words or short phrases, these tips, these, we yell out to the player this or that. And what I just realized is those actually almost always are abstractions.
Yeah.
Like, hey, be confident. Like, be confident. That's an abstract term. It's not, that's not boiling it down, and it's not explaining, it's not really giving action. It's not giving an action item to the player. And it just made me realize you're right. Communicating in abstractions is where we absolutely want to get away from as a coaching community.
That's where the gap is between the mental game and the physical game.
Wow.
100%.
That's a good one, man. I'm being honest. I never thought about that way, but when you're coaching the mental game and maybe even the physical game too, but when we're giving these short cues, these quick cues, these catchphrases, these cliche phrases, a lot of them are just abstractions, which are practically unusable in most cases.
They're almost counterproductive in a sense, because when we're telling someone to relax, an athlete that seems tense, he's pacing around, we're telling them to relax or be confident or flush or get the next one. They're almost counterproductive because it forces the athlete to acknowledge in that moment, I'm stressed out right now, or I'm not looking confident right now. And then an athlete, human beings, we always act, behave, and perform in accordance to what we believe to be true about ourselves. So if you acknowledge in the moment and your coach yells at you, hey, be confident, they're going to think, okay, well, I'm not confident right now. And number two, they don't know how to be confident or relax or be engaged in the present moment. So it's almost like a counterproductive statement if there's no substance behind it.
Yes. What a great observation. If you're a coach and you're telling your player to do the opposite of X, then inherently a lot of them are going to go, well, if he wants me to do the opposite of this, then I must be doing that. I must be doing the opposite.
Exactly.
And that is going to wrap up part 1 of our interview with Ryan Foe. We'll be back with part 2 next week. It just gets better. Part 2 and part 3, I think every part actually gets better and better. The information that is usable by all of you, trust me on this, this will give you a much better understanding of a lot of the things that are going on in the mental game, in the minds of our players with their struggles and how to work through them and how to help them and how to avoid those pitfalls that a lot of us coaches fall into when we actually think we're helping our players. As always, thanks for being here this week. We'll see you next Tuesday when the next episode rolls out. Until then, take care of yourselves. Stay healthy. Get those vitamins. Get that rest. People getting sick this time of year. A lot of people seem to be getting sick. I know I'm a little bit down and out. Get those vitamins. Get your rest so you can be the best coach you can be, because at the end of the day, your mental health, your coaching game, leading your team, being the leader that your team needs, your family needs, we all know it starts with our health. So let's make sure that we prioritize that. Vitamins, hydration, eating healthy, getting that rest. That's the start. And from there, you can be that great person that you want to be. And in this case, as we talk about on this podcast, you can be that great coach that you want to be. So take care of yourselves, and then take this information out there, use it with your players, test it out with your players, try it out in different ways with your players, and also share your feedback with me on things that you've had success with, things you still have questions about. Coach Bo at 8020baseball.com. You can also reach me through the website 8020baseball.com. If you haven't been over there, go check it out. There's 13 or 14 videos, a dozen articles. So reach out if you have any questions, or share with me your strategies. Share with me your successes with this, especially the mental game as we start this season, as we start to get ready for the season. It starts up between the ears. Until next week, take care of yourselves, take care of your families. Adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.